have signed up for LinkedIn by show of hands? Awesome. I think that's pretty much all of you. And if you haven't, you should totally sign up. I'm not biased whatsoever. How many of you have sent an invitation or connected to somebody on LinkedIn? Okay, awesome. Pretty much all of you as well. So if you've done any one of those things that I've mentioned, then it's very likely that my team has built or worked on that experience. As Ellie mentioned, I'm currently a director of product in the growth team at LinkedIn, and I'm really excited to be back here with you guys. My first Women in Product conference was actually last year, about a month after I came back from maternity leave with my son. And I remember it was my first work event outside of my highly organized daily schedule of meeting and pumping session and meeting. And I remember being really frazzled. I was running back and forth in the San Jose Convention Center between the mother's room and the main stage trying to catch a talk. All that to say is, if there are any pumping moms in the audience out there, I'm so glad you're here. I know the coordination and the mental stress that adds, and so thank you so much for being here. So in between those pumping sessions, which in and of themselves were definitely a moment of belonging and community, I did manage to catch a couple inspiring product talks. And I'm really grateful to be back here with you today to share some of the insights that I've learned from doing growth at LinkedIn for almost 8 years across monetization and consumer products. I launched our first product for salespeople. I worked on acquisition and retention growth for LinkedIn premium subscriptions. And most recently, I redesigned our consumer registration and onboarding flows and shifted LinkedIn to focus on more than top-of-the-funnel growth. And it's that pivot to building for quality growth that I'd like to share with you all. It's something that I think is applicable to any product and company, and I'd love for you all to take some of the strategies that I'll share back to your own companies and help us break through the typical narrative of growth hacking for a more thoughtful alternative of quality growth. So let's start. So how many of you have ever been asked to do this? Take this metric and make it go up and to the right. I see some hands raised, some head nods, so it sounds familiar. It could be anything. It could be monthly active users, daily active users, retention, engagement, app downloads, whatever the case may be. I've certainly been asked to do this, particularly for engagement metrics like monthly active users. Now, if you're anything like me, your first reaction is, how the heck do I do that, right? Should I send more emails? Should I launch more push notifications? How do I bring more people back to the site and to the product? First of all, I just want to stop us right here and get something super clear. Growth is not just about moving metrics up and to the right. Everybody repeat that with me. Growth is not just about moving metrics up and to the right, despite what you might hear. If you only focus on quantity, you'll end up with what's called a leaky bucket. And for those of you who aren't familiar, a leaky bucket is when you add users to your product or to the top of your funnel, only to lose them out to the other side, because no attention is being paid to the quality of their experience. And in many cases, this is worse than not adding these users to your product in the first place, because now they've had a bad experience, and it's going to be very difficult to bring them back. Eventually, your leaky bucket will have no more water, and your product will not have any more users, and that's not where anybody wants to be. So instead, I'd love for you all to focus on building for quality growth, and that's about the acceleration of your product or your company's vision. It's not just about the numbers. It's about making sure that the vision and mission of your company happens on a much faster timeline. So at LinkedIn, our vision is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. It's a powerful and inspiring vision that's kept me at LinkedIn for almost 8 years. And I feel very fortunate to be on the growth team there, where we get to accelerate this vision by building out the economic graph that connects the people to companies, to jobs, and to skills. And so taking this view led us to this concept of quality signups, as opposed to just signups, which is your typical growth metric. And it's because as we matured as a company, we realized that it didn't matter how many people we got to sign up to LinkedIn. If we couldn't retain them, if they didn't ever come back to LinkedIn, we would never be able to create that economic opportunity for them. So instead, we wanted to start distinguishing what makes a sign-up quality, right? What characteristics correlate with long-term retention of these users back to LinkedIn? And focusing on quality means that if we launch an initiative that doubles signups but doesn't move quality signups, that's not actually a success in our eyes. And that's because you've just created that leaky bucket that I warned you about. And so here's an example of why this is important. A few years ago, the team that I was on ran an experiment where we aggressively prompted people to sign up for LinkedIn if they'd viewed more than a certain number of profiles without signing in. I know. Just wait. So we saw a double-digit percentage lift to signups, and we thought, this is great. We're getting more people onto the platform. We're creating economic opportunity. What we didn't see at the time was quality signups didn't really move much at all, right? We weren't actually delivering more value. People were just signing up because we were asking them to. And in fact, we were probably delivering less value because over time, these people would just leave LinkedIn because they weren't getting to see the profiles that they had actually come here to see. If we had just focused on quality signups at that time, we could have actually saved ourselves a lot of trouble and saved some of the trouble that we've done to sort of undo some of this. So this is, again, why it's important to look at something like quality growth as opposed to just growth. And so how do you enable that quality growth then? You need to first figure out what makes your product sticky. What about your product is so sticky to users that they can't help but keep coming back? And to do that, you need to first start with your value propositions. Or in other words, what's the core value that your product or your company delivers to its users? The reason that you want to start here versus with the data is because you don't want to boil the ocean. There are an infinite number of metrics that you could track and try to correlate with retention, but you have to prioritize. So think about what are the foundational actions or characteristics that align with the core value of your product. Use those to form some hypotheses, and then go and validate that with the retention data. And this is so you're not chasing down every possible thread, because that ends up being a big waste of time. Trust me, I've definitely done that in the past. And so coming back to this idea of quality signups for LinkedIn, when we started to think about what that was, we went back to what LinkedIn's core value propositions are, and what are the foundational actions that enable us to deliver on those value props. So LinkedIn's core value propositions are to help users get the right job, build meaningful relationships, and stay informed. If you think about getting the right job, what does this mean for a user? This means that a user needs to be able to represent her experience, meaning that she can add a position or an education to her profile. In order to build meaningful relationships on LinkedIn, you need to first be able to make that initial connection. And to stay informed, a user needs to be able to be reachable by other users to get that information. So we created this quality sign-up metric based on those three foundational actions of adding a position or education, making a connection, and confirming an email address or enabling a push notification so that you're reachable by other users, all within 7 days of signing up. And once we had this metric, we went and validated that against the data to see how sticky it was. And it turned out to be crazy predictive. Almost every engagement and retention metric that we cared about was heavily dominated by these quality signups. So just to name a few stats, 75% of our most active users were quality signups. Our quality signups are 10 times more likely to be monthly active, and they reach that monthly active status 4 times faster than other signups. So needless to say, quality signups have been really instrumental for LinkedIn as we think about growth and retention. So now that you've figured out what makes your product sticky, it's time to design a true north that's measurable, simple, and actionable. Why do you need a true north metric? Well, simply said, you can't grow what you can't measure immediately. Emphasis here on immediately. Ideally, your true north metric should be highly responsive. It's something that you can iterate very quickly on. It shouldn't be something like active after 6 months, because unless you want to launch a product and wait 6 months to see whether or not it's successful, it's not going to be very useful for you or your team. And that's why we actually had that 7 days constraint on our quality sign-up metric, because it makes it pretty much immediately measurable. And this is great because anytime we launch a test or an improvement to onboarding, within a week we'll know whether or not it was successful and be highly confident that it'll result in that long-term retention that we're looking for. Secondly, once you have this true north metric, make sure that you're measuring success against it moving forward. Every product you launch, every A/B test that you run should all benchmark back to this true north. And here, I want to call out that that's why it's so important to start with your value props. If you measure the wrong thing that doesn't actually capture the value that you're delivering to your users, you'll very quickly go down the wrong path, and you'll start to optimize for the wrong thing. So think back to that example I shared where we grew signups, but we barely moved quality, right? I should have taken my own advice. One, we should have measured success against quality signups. It was actually a metric we already had at the time. And two, it was a good thing that we actually had a quality signups metric that was based on our core values, because if we hadn't, even today, we might not have known that this superficially successful test that we had run was actually not working out in the long term. So again, this is why starting with your value props when you form that true north metric is very important. So now that you have the beginnings of a true north metric, you need to make sure it follows the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. So simplicity matters here. Your true north metric isn't just a number on a dashboard or a chart. It's something that you're going to rally your team around and need to communicate every day. It needs to be simple and understandable. Right? A linear regression model might tell you the exact number or threshold that will maximize retention. But at the end of the day, if you can't communicate it easily, if people can't remember it, then it's not accomplishing its purpose as a true north metric. We have some very memorable examples in the tech industry today. So Facebook is very well known for their 10 friends in 7 days metric. Slack has a 2,000 messages in a team metric. And do you think that if you're a Facebook user that made 9 friends in 8 days, that would really have that much of an impact on your retention? Of course not. But 10 friends, 7 days, 2,000 messages, these numbers are very easily memorized, so much so that you and I are here talking about them today. And so that shows you the power of simplicity in communicating your true north metric. So last but not least, your true north metric should be actionable. And what do I mean by that? So too often, our metrics only capture the end goal. Think about monthly active users, daily active users. These metrics are good in that they do capture some of that end value, the fact that somebody is coming back to your product or to your site. But nothing about the metric itself tells you about how to grow that value. How do I grow MAUs? How do I grow DAUs? I believe that a great metric can also drive product strategy. Embedded in the metric itself should be some indication of how you can grow value to your users. I've personally gone through this experience at LinkedIn. So we used to very actively monitor and try to grow monthly active users. But I was frustrated because it felt like I was staring at a blank sheet of paper and trying to figure out how do I retain users, how do I get them to engage more. And instead of writer's block, I had product manager's block. And so what I really wanted to do was understand what were the core drivers for how a user could start to get value from LinkedIn. Now, we had the quality signups metric at the time. It was really good for new signups, but I wanted an equivalent true north for our entire existing user base. And so I went through that process that I just shared with you, and we ended up with a new true north metric called quality members. And this metric captures whether or not a user is identifiable, reachable, and connected as the foundational drivers for how a user gets value with LinkedIn. So take myself for an example. There are 355 Liz Lees on LinkedIn. It's only because of my profile that has my photo and my background that people can identify me as the right Liz Lee for whatever question or opportunity they might have. And 8 years ago, I got that opportunity, my current job, which I love, but only because I was reachable on LinkedIn by the hiring manager because of the confirmed email address I had on my LinkedIn account. And today, I'm on LinkedIn all the time, not just because I work there, but because I'm connected to my colleagues and my professional community there. And I learn from them all the time via the articles that they're posting about growth or product management. So this true north metric of quality members is great because whenever a new person joins my team, I can very quickly and easily, within 5 minutes, tell them about this metric, define it, And embedded in that definition itself, this new team member knows, hey, in order to grow retention on LinkedIn, I should focus on initiatives that help people connect or to fill out more of their profile. And it's because embedded in the metric itself is this idea of how I can grow value for our users. So to sum up, here are the key takeaways. Number one, growth is not just about moving metrics up and to the right. Instead, I want you all to focus on building for quality growth, which should accelerate the vision of your product or your company. Then, in order to figure that out, think about your value propositions and figure out what makes your product sticky. And then go and validate that with your retention data to make sure it does actually correlate with the value that you're trying to grow. And finally, design a true north that's measurable, simple, and actionable. Now, I'd love for you all to take these principles that I've shared back to your own companies, think through your core value propositions, and design your own true north metrics that focus on delivering more value to your users and help us change the narrative from growth hacking to quality growth. Thank you.